how are you feeling about this trade season, compared to others in the past?
Last year you asked me that question and I said, this is going to be the Lucas Giolito trade season. And I wasn't wrong, but my second point was always expect the unexpected. And it turns out Verlander and Scherzer were the big names that got moved. And so there's always that, right? So I'll tell you right now, it's probably the Garrett Crochet trade season, but then you're going to get some unexpected names that suddenly will surprise you. I've been doing this long enough now to kind of see how that's typically how it goes.
Yeah, it's, if you asked me first day, opening day, you think Garrett Crochet is going to get moved? I would have said, absolutely not. What the heck are you talking about? Because that's a guy, I could see the White Sox moving players, if you asked me opening day, but I figured, okay, no, that's a guy that, you could, get signed up for an extension, build the rotation around. But it looks like the White Sox, they're going gung-ho on this thing. And, we actually just had a report this past weekend said that there were contract extension talks at one point. And now it looks like the White Sox, they have pretty much moved on from that, and they will be looking to cash in. And, actually, just looking at the farm system rankings on Fangraphs, the White Sox, they have really piled up some prospects there in the system. They've built up the value pretty well. Go back how many years ago, they did have one of the better farm systems, not quite at that level, but they're slowly getting back to that point. And at this point, it's looking like, they could end up having one of the top farm systems in the game when all is said and done. So, since we're on the White Sox, let's start there, right? Let's just start this thing off hot. They have the biggest treasure chest with two players, right? Garrett Crochet, like we mentioned, and Luis Robert. You also got someone like Eric Fedde, who could definitely be a target for, starting pitching is always a commodity at the market, and he's having a pretty decent season. I just got to ask you right off the bat, do you ultimately see all three of those guys being moved? Do you maybe see just one of the, Luis Robert, Garrett Crochet, or maybe see both superstars staying, maybe Eric Fedde getting moved? If you were to kind of, based off of how you're feeling right now, which way are you leaning when it comes to, if we were to maybe just focus on Robert Crochet, what do you see ending up with those two guys?
So Crochet is definitely getting moved. So he kind of like he was a gift that landed in their laps because his value was kind of nowhere at the beginning of the season because he was basically an injured kind of failed reliever, to be honest. And he always had the upside, but he hadn't really brought it to the table. And suddenly they converted him to a starter and his value has just skyrocketed. So that for them was like, wow, okay. But now here's the thing. He kind of burned through a bunch of control years earlier on, in his tenure there. So he's only got 2.5 years of control left, and their window is going to go farther out than that. So if they can't extend him, they got to trade him while his value is high. They can capitalize on that. Now, there are two concerns, I think, if you were an acquiring team. One is he's never pitched this many innings before. So there's kind of a durability question. Like, is he going to have an innings limit? And the second thing is he has been injured a couple of times. Yeah. And so you've got some risk, and you've got to bake that in to any sort of scenario if you're the team looking to acquire him. Offsetting that is the fact that there's so many contenders that need starting pitching, and there's really not much out there, and he is just on fire. So if you look at his numbers, you look at his performances, he's one of the best starting. He's on a Cy Young track right now. It's ridiculous. Oh yeah, out of nowhere. So on the one hand, the glass half full says, yeah, let's trade for him, and we'll figure out how to smartly use him and get that impact arm. The glass half empty says, there's some risk there. So, there's a lot of value because he has 2.5 years of control. So they're going to get a lot for him. But teams are also looking at the risk side of it.
Yeah. And just to kind of chime in and you bring up a very good point with the innings. So that's something I've been mentioning. I've done a couple of videos now talking about trades, I would like to see, or I brought up Garrett Crochet trade proposals in another video. And that is one thing that I've mentioned is the innings. There is one scenario where maybe you could see this guy, his innings being managed down the stretch, and he can end up being like a valuable bullpen piece, similar like someone like an Andrew Miller, back in the mid 2010s, helping out in the postseason. I could see a scenario like that to help manage those innings. At the end of the day, with what he's bringing to the table this year, I mean, if you look at these numbers, I mean, this first year over 100 innings pitched, but ERA at a 3.02, FIP at a 2.37. That's fantastic. 12 and a half strikeouts per 9, under 2 walks per 9, under a home run per 9. I mean, that is just a ridiculous ratio right there. Combined with this FIP, he's almost at a 4.0 Fangraph wins above replacement, and we're halfway through the season. He has a very big case to start the All-Star game. Ultimately, with Garrett Crochet, do you think, right now on baseball trade values on the simulator, right now he's in the median value. He's right at around 60 million. He's at 59.7. Ultimately, do you see, because of the innings, do you think teams will maybe go to the lower end of that range, which right now is at right around 48 million? Or do you think we maybe, because of that market, because of teams looking for pitching, do you think we'll see maybe right around that 60 million or possibly higher?
I think it's those two things kind of offset. You just sort of said them. On the one hand, there's some risks, so we're going to skew a little bit lower to be safe. But on the other hand, oh my God, who else is out there with an impact arm? That's it. And so if you're smart, I'm going to just throw out the Dodgers because it's been reported that they've made an offer. So they've had a bunch of injuries in their staff, but they also know how to kind of smartly kind of mix and match and use them, and then set themselves up for playoff run. They've been doing it for years. So you kind of figure if he were to go to a team like that, they would figure it out, right? So, and then further, you got him for another 2 years after that, and he's in effect laid the groundwork this year that he's a starter going forward, right? So now you can build him up, into next year and have probably a full year of him, and then another year after that, which is where a whole bunch of value is still. The other thing that this sort of adds to his value is he's on a ridiculously cheap first-year arbitration deal. He's not even making $1 million. He's making $800K. I mean, that is absurd. That's barely over league minimum.
Basically free.
Yeah, exactly. Because he was a struggling reliever prior to this, right? So there was not much of a case. And so now the way it typically works is our arbitration salaries build on each other. Now, it's too simple to say, okay, well, he's only going to make 50% more. Is only 1.2 million. No, he's going to get more than that, but it's not going to be a huge amount. I mean, he's going to get 5 to 8 next year, right? So in other words, there's still going to be a lot of surplus value in the ensuing years because of that sort of foundation. So he's not going to cost a whole lot in salary. So that means you have to give up a lot in prospect. Yeah. That's where it lands. So I think it's going to be right around there.
Yeah, no, that to me makes sense. I was kind of thinking like, could I maybe get to the high end here of that trade value, or maybe like you said, the innings probably are going to offset it a little bit. I could see you, probably right around that $60 million range in terms of prospects. When it comes to a good fit for Crochet, where do you think would ultimately be the best landing spot? You got plenty of teams out there in contention that could use some pitching. One team that I keep bringing up in scenarios are the Orioles, with all the injuries they've been having and the prospects that they have, where it's not even just prospects that they have. It's because I'm starting to learn over the years, it's teams, they might have the prospects, but even though no one is exactly untouchable, you see these teams really hug a lot more on a certain prospect. So I'm kind of looking at teams, which one would sting the least to give up? I see the Orioles, and you got a couple of power hitting guys there in Basayo and Kobe Mayo. So I could maybe see them possibly giving up one of those guys for a couple of years of Crochet. Like you mentioned, the Dodgers. If you were to pick a fit, based off of how you woke up today, where would you see Garrett Crochet landing?
I see the Orioles having the best sort of farms. You got to look at who has the most trade capital, right? If this is kind of one of the top assets or the number one asset in the market right now, who has the most, and therefore where is it going to sting the least? Yeah. And who needs them the most? The Orioles check all those boxes, right? They've got prospects just coming out of the woodwork. They're burning a hole in their pocket basically, and they're rising up through the system to AA and AAA, and there's nowhere to put them now. So like, where are you going to put all these guys? So you're at a point where you have to stop prospect hugging and start spending that capital. You have to, and especially since they're in a tight race in the AL East with the Yankees and so on. So I think you got to go for it. So you can't you can't sort of hug all those prospects. So, and this is a perfect, and you got 2.5 years of control of Crochet if you want to take him. So it fits your window. It's a perfect match.
Yeah, I completely agree. The Orioles, for me, are that team for Crochet. Moving on to another player on the White Sox. Very interesting, Luis Robert, right? He's always had that injury bug attached to him. This is a guy that just can never seem to get away from it. Had a great season last year, almost 40 home runs. He was stealing bases along with it. A guy that can change your lineup, not just offensively, but he can provide that defensive value as well in center field. He's playing a higher value position out there. So Luis Robert, people, they want to just, lean on that injury bug sort of thing. But this is a guy where, in my opinion, personally, what he brings to the table when healthy, I think can outweigh that risk, along with just the cheap contract that he has. He has those club options coming up soon. Luis Robert, ultimately, do you see him staying? Do you see him going? What do you think?
I see him staying. And here's why. He's cold. He's coming off a hip injury. He hasn't really got it going yet.
Yep.
Typically, when trades are made at the deadline in the middle of a season, teams want sort of an impact bat and certainty. They want impact and certainty, right?
Yes.
He's not quite there. There's a little doubt in your mind, like, what are we getting? Because, you're not sure. He's batting a little over 200 right now, I think. And, it hasn't quite got going yet. And you get the sense that he's shaking off some rust a little bit. We're not sure if the hip's still bothering him or not. I don't know what's going on, but he just hasn't gotten it going yet. And so that's starting to hurt his value. You've seen our site, it's gone down a little bit from the 40s to the 30s now.
Yep, just noticed that. Yep.
It's just like, because, you've also noticed, probably if you read the reports, the buzz on him is kind of dying down. Like, because from the White Sox perspective, they're not selling high. His values, like they would only, I think, entertain offers if he's really having a gangbusters year. He's not. And then he's got a backloaded contract. He's going to get a little bit more expensive. And so I feel like it's not the right time. If he can put it together in the second half, then they'll have a better case to trade him in the offseason. And even if they don't, they've got several more opportunities down the road. So I just feel like this is not the right time.
Yeah, when you look at his stat line, it's very weird, right? He's still slugging a ton, right near 500 at a 487. But then you look at the batting average at the 205, 279 on base. Like you said, doesn't seem like he's fully gotten it going. A 109 WRC plus is respectable, but that is down from what it was last year at a 128. Even defensively, the numbers are a little down compared to last year. So, if you asked me, a week ago, I would probably say, yeah, I think he can end up getting moved. But then I'm looking at the updated value on there. And I also sort of think with the White Sox, like you said, they'd be kind of selling low at this point. So would you rather maybe just wait till the offseason or maybe even the deadline next year and, go from there? So, but yeah, it's just crazy how you go from the beginning of the year, and as time goes on, things can just switch like that, like opposite of Crochet in the beginning of the year. And now I'm like, wow, yeah, I think he's probably going to get traded. And even Robert too. I'm thinking this guy is totally going to get moved. And now I'm thinking, he probably could end up staying. So, but it's not just those two guys. We got Eric Fedde as well. I'm guessing you're thinking he's probably getting a move.
Right? No question. I mean, there's so many teams looking for starting pitching. I mean, he's not, he's not an ace top of the rotation guy, but he's good. And he's, ever since he came back from Asia, he's been much better than when he came up with the Nationals. He wasn't quite cutting it then. So a lot of times you see this, you see Miles Mikolas, you see Merrill Kelly, and a few other stories. They go to Asia, they figure it out, they come back, and they're better than they were. They may not be aces necessarily like those guys, but they're better. And he's one of those cases. And he's on a reasonably affordable contract, so there's surplus value there. We have him in the high teens. So, somebody's going to – the demand for starting pitching is really high. So many guys are on the AIL. And so many contenders are like, what do we got? Look at the Astros. They're decimated. Look, even the Dodgers are looking for pitching. Everybody's looking for pitching. So I think, there's definitely a market for Eric Fedde, and he's affordable. So there's no question we get moved.
That's the big thing with me. Like, yes, you look at the ERA, you look at the FIP, they're in the threes, having a really solid year. But it's, again, I think that's something people, they tend to forget about a little bit. It's the contract. When, I think that's still a misconception out there with a good amount of people where, they think like, oh, why is this value this? He's a really good player, or why is it so low? They forget it's a whole package, right? You need to look at not just the performance, but you need to look at the contract as well.
Yeah.
But hey, no, like you said, he's affordable, right? So it'd be easy to pay the guy, right? But it's not just the White Sox out there. There's a lot of intriguing teams out there, and another team right now, I'm not even sure what to think of the Toronto Blue Jays, right? You got Vlad Jr. there, you got Bo Bichette. They were coming up in trade rumors in the offseason. People are thinking, what the heck's going on here? And also, where's the extension for these guys? And now we're at a point where the Blue Jays, they're really underperforming here. And with Vlad Jr., he's having himself a bounce back season. He got off to a bit of a slow start, but those numbers are looking really good right now. Hitting 297, a 376 on base, 471 on the slugging, a 143 WRC plus. We're getting pretty close. I would say not maybe pretty close, but closer to those 2021 numbers that he was putting up. So definitely he is making a case here to be an impact bat if he were to be moved, right? And then you got someone like Bo Bichette, where he's been the opposite, where in the last several years, he has been great. He's been a solid hitter, maybe not the best defensively, but for the most part, gets the job done. And this year, the numbers have completely tanked. He's only hitting 233, a 286 on base, 335 slugging, just came back recently from an injury. So, where are you at with these two guys right now? I'm sort of still wondering, could both of these guys get moved? Maybe one or the other. Maybe they both stay put. What do you think?
I'm shaking my head. I think they're both staying put. I'll tell you why. I'll start with Bo. Bo's cold. Just to reiterate my earlier point, he's like, you don't want to give up assets for a guy who's hitting whatever it was, and under 300 up on base percentage is not an impact bat at the moment. And I know there's the track record there, and he's still young enough. And he does have a little bit of a history of kind of coming on in the second half. So you have to kind of bake in a little bit of positive regression there. So there's that, but he's still not quite having the season. And so there's a little bit of doubt, enough so that you may not want to fork over some assets for something if he stays cold. And also, I think that from the Blue Jays perspective, I think they want to give it one more shot next year. That's the overarching. You've probably seen reports like, we're going to pull these back. I think they were sort of gauging the market and not really getting the kind of offers that they wanted. And they've got a huge fan base in Canada, 2 stars, and they can sell tickets for those 2 stars and try again next year. And I feel like that's the overriding concern. But let me just talk about Vlad's value. We don't have a whole lot of surplus value on Vlad. I will tell you why. Yes, the bat is impactful. Absolutely no question. He is hitting. He's raking. The defense is terrible. The base running is terrible. He's just a bat, right? And so so there's that. But it's an impactful bat. But the other thing is the money. He's making about $20 million this year in his second to last arbitration year. So that's going to be another. If you traded for him at the deadline, figure about $7 million or so. That you'd have to owe him. But here's the other thing. He's going to be due for another arbitration raise next year, up to close to $30 million. And so you have to think about it from the team's perspective and what their budgets are. Can they afford a $30 million hit next year? A lot of these teams are maxed out. And so I know it's Vlad, and I know he's a star, but given what I just said with the defense and the base running, he's just basically a DH. Are you going to pay him $30 million next year? So that's going to create a kind of a question in the acquirer's minds. You think about the Padres, you think about some of these other teams that are maxed out. Like, hey, you don't know if I can swing that, right? So that's why there's not a whole lot of surplus value, because he's just making too much money given the production he has overall.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, actually, because I've had people say, like, man, like, why is his value so low? And one thing I also go to are the last couple of years, and the longer the season goes on and the numbers that he's putting up, the more those down couple of years go away a little bit. But I think a lot of people think because he's arbitration, he's cheap. Not necessarily. Like you just said, he's making $19 million this year. That's going to probably go up a good chunk next year. And again, that gets back to what I just said a little bit earlier. it's not just the player, it's the money, right? You got to look at it from an economical point of view. Is at the end of the day, unfortunately, we would love it for it to be like MLB The Show, just plug some players in, hit the button, and trade some guys, but it doesn't work like that.
No.
Money is a big thing. I'm glad you brought that up, because even I forget myself. Yeah, he's making like almost $20 million. Like, but you don't think about that because he's arbitration, right? So usually they're making a lot less. So the Blue Jays, at one point, I'm thinking, maybe they could move these guys, but like you said, money for the Vlad, with his contract, Bo Bichette underperforming, you're having to try to justify a lot of things, right, to be able to move these guys. At the end of the day, it probably is more likely they stay put. However, I think they might have a couple of pieces. You got someone like you say, Kikuchi. I think he fits in that Eric Fedde sort of bracket. A serviceable guy that can go, back end of your rotation, give you some innings down the stretch.
He will be traded, no question.
At the end of the day, do you still see the Blue Jays being active on the trade market?
Yeah, for those kinds of guys, the rentals, basically, because there's no reason not to. If they basically said, okay, this year, wave the white flag, but we're going to keep Bo and Vladdy for next year, and keep our stars, sell tickets, try again next year, but we can get rid of the rentals. Now, there's not a whole lot of value in those rentals. I'm going to be honest. Kikuchi's probably the number one guy because of the dearth of starters on the market, because he's having a decent-ish year. So, good for him for turning it around, because he was sort of up and down when he was in Seattle. Now he's figured it out. He's a little bit more consistent, and teams like consistency. If you're going to trade for somebody down the stretch, you want to know what you're getting. So, he's a good 3 or 4 starter in a rotation. That's fine. So they'll trade him. Yimi Garcia has been injured a little bit. He's got some positive qualities, but he's not going to get you much. And then they've got like guys like Kiermaier on a rental contract, but he's underperforming his contract. So is Justin Turner. So it's like, But those guys, you just kind of throw them out there, whatever you can get for them.
For sure. Yeah, Justin Turner, man, my ginger brother, and he has come back down to earth. He was off to the hot start, but moving on to another team where unfortunately, they got dealt a pretty big blow when it came to a trade chip. That's the Miami Marlins, Jesus Luzardo. Jesus Luzardo, this was a guy I was pretty much saying every single day, this guy's getting moved. Like, there's no way he ends up staying. Now, has the back injury. He's going to be missing some time. Do you think with Jesus Luzardo, even with the back injury, also did have the elbow issue not too long ago, and the numbers haven't looked great this year, do you ultimately see Jesus Luzardo staying put? They maybe revisit it in the offseason, comes back down the stretch, maybe makes a few starts, shows that he's okay. Maybe they do it in the offseason, or could you still see a scenario where a team will maybe, cough up some prospects for him?
I think teams have kind of learned their lesson in this department. A couple of years ago, Frankie Montas had a lot of sort of shoulder issues, and he was on the IL, and then they sort of dangled him, and then the Yankees gave him stuff. Then they regretted it because he didn't perform, and they'd made this a couple of years ago after Sonny Gray was on the IL, and then a similar thing happened. Like, teams have learned their lesson now. Those are 2 examples of Yankees trades that kind of didn't go well. I don't see him moving until he comes back, shows that he's healthy, and show he can perform at the level he was performing at. Again, teams want certainty. Now, the only doubt in my mind about that is because there's so few good starters on the market, like maybe somebody will reach, but you'll see that his value has gone pretty far down in our model.
Yeah, I saw that.
So they're not going to get as much from him as they would have earlier, So it's like, from the Marlins perspective, you might be better off waiting and wait until he comes back to health and try him again in the offseason, because you're not, the risk reward ratio is a little bit off now.
Yeah. And, speaking of the risk reward, another guy that's also had some issues staying healthy, but he's having himself a pretty good year. And then there's also maybe a couple off the field sort of things I could maybe see teams worrying about with him. And that's Jazz Chisholm. Has a pretty healthy value there on baseball trade values at the moment. It's not going to be cheap to get someone like him. Having himself, arguably his best season so far, considering he's been healthy all year. He's at 81 games, so he's on pace here to play a full season. Has a 109 WRC plus, 10 homers, 14 stolen bases. So, But with me personally, I'll see what you think. I don't know. I just don't see him getting moved. I just think because he's cheap, he has that control until free agency. I feel like the numbers might not be strong enough for a team to really pull the trigger on going for someone like Jazz Chisholm with how pricey he will be. What do you think?
I get that. I'm squinting a little bit because I want those numbers to be a little bit higher because it would support my theory that, you want an impact bat at the deadline.
Yeah.
But he's trending up. And look, his swagger has always sort of outpaced his production, to be honest. But he does have that sort of star quality, and he does have that upside. He's got that athleticism. He's got the speed. He's got the power. He's got the whole combination. He's like a 5-tool player pretty much. And so he just has to put it together. But you get the sense that he's maturing and that he is starting to put it together. And I think that's going to intrigue some teams. So I would not be surprised if a team pulled the trigger on that because they want kind of to bet on the upside. He is young. He's healthy. He's, he's going well enough. And you can sort of envision if you moved him from a bad team to a good team, he might just sort of fit in well and really be productive. So I'm leaning more towards yes on this one.
Yeah, I'm very I would love to see it. You know me. I love all the juiciness at the deadline. Hope I see it. Hopefully,
he was going to be my surprise pick to be moved, but it's not a surprise because people are talking about him now.
Yeah, but the Marlins, at the end of the day, they do have a lot of other guys they can move. Mainly Tanner Scott. I definitely see him getting moved. I don't see him staying. Someone like Josh Bell, impact bat, or maybe not impact, veteran bat that could help out a team. Someone like Brian De La Cruz having himself a pretty decent year, could give some pop from the right side there. So the Marlins, I see them being active at the end of the day. But I want to ask you, who are some, when it comes to a couple other teams that are sort of really just, what's the right way to say this? They're straddling the line, right? They're right there in contention. Some of them have come alive. You got, a team like my Red Sox who have been kind of just hanging around for a little while now. But a couple other teams, the Astros and the Mets, have gotten red hot lately, and they're right back in this thing when everyone was basically saying they're done, it's over. Where ultimately, if you were to pick one of those teams ultimately selling, do you think either of those teams end up selling off pieces, or could you see those teams actually buying?
I can see them buying. I think it's, I'm going to give a pat answer. It's too early to tell. It's there's so many different teams. I mean, we got 6 teams in each league making the playoffs. It really has kind of juiced them up, but it's also had this effect of kind of sliding the activity towards the end of July because teams really want to know where they stand, and there are so many of them on the fence right now, and it's affecting the whole supply and demand ratio because there's so many on the fence. So they don't have supply on the market basically. So if a team that is clearly wanting to buy, and I'm thinking about like the Mariners here, they clearly need a bat and they clearly have the pieces on their farm to deal, but they're waiting to see who's going to be available, and so there's we're kind of stuck until those things kind of iron themselves out. So I don't even want, it's not I'm not a predictor. So I can't tell how it's going to shake out or not. I can see teams like the Rangers and the Diamondbacks, last year's 2 World Series teams, are kind of trending down. Like they have a hangover, it's like, okay.
Yeah, man. Jordan Montgomery, what the heck happened to that guy?
Yeah. So I can see them kind of falling off, for example. And maybe become sellers of, but if they don't, neither of those teams has a whole lot to sell in terms of rentals. So, because they're both kind of built for the longer run. So there's not a whole lot that's going to come on the market. So you end up sort of thinking, okay, who are the obvious sellers now? You've got the A's, you've got, the Marlins, you've got the White Sox. I think the Nationals are going to end up selling, by the way. I know they've been kind of outperforming a little bit in terms of expectations, but I don't think they're there yet. So the Kyle Finnegans and Hunter Harveys, I think, will get moved in a market always starved for relievers. So I think at the end of July, you'll see them being sellers. I'll throw that one out there.
Yeah, it's crazy with the Mets. Like, I don't know what the heck is going on with this Mets team this year. They got Grimace helping them out. You got Jose Iglesias putting on a concert. Like, it is honestly, like, when you look at the Mets, it is one of the most wackadoodle seasons I've ever seen for a team, right? Just the turnaround that they've had. It's crazy what is going on there. But One team that a lot of people were very crazy about in the offseason, more in a negative way, the Oakland A's. Obviously, with the move from Oakland, you have been, tied with the A's, for a while now. Ultimately, they were off to a pretty fun start in the beginning of the year. People are thinking, oh, maybe surprise team this year. And they came back down to earth. One big piece, and he was getting all of the rage earlier in the season, was Mason Miller. He's a very intriguing person, a very intriguing player to think about, because this is a guy, he had the elbow injury last year. They said, okay, we're going to have him as a reliever for this year. Still could end up being a starter. That was the plan ultimately, and he's just been so dominant as a reliever. I would say it's pretty similar to that Garrett Crochet situation, except he's the reliever version of it. Ultimately, with Miller, do you see him staying, or do you think it's just going to be too expensive at the end of the day? Crochet, you could justify because of the starter, obviously, or he's a starter. Miller's the reliever. Where are you thinking with that?
So I think he's staying. He has 5.5 years of control. And I'm not saying the A's will totally keep him through those entire 5.5 years. Mm-hmm. They do want to be competitive again, obviously, and say the next maybe 3 years from now. So you would think, okay, we can have him for the last 2. But even so, I think because he's a reliever and because his ridiculous numbers are making him so expensive and such a hot commodity that they're asking for the world. And teams are saying, I don't know if I want to pay the world. He's great and all, but that's a lot for a reliever. I think that's what's going on. And so they're like, okay, call us when you change your mind. And nobody has yet. So, and they have every right to do that because they've got plenty of time to wait. And so they'll just keep using him. He'll continue to dominate on a losing team. But that's okay because they're just sort of playing the long game with him. And that's where it's at.
But one candidate they do have is Brent Rooker, right?
Yep.
Brent Rooker was a name that popped up last year as well. And he's having himself a great season. Just taking a look at the numbers with Brent Rooker, I think people, I don't know, maybe people don't realize like how decent of a season he's having at the plate. He's hitting 261, has a slugging over 500, has a 140 WRC plus, really solid numbers. Probably going to be more of just a bat at the end of the day. He's not really giving much defensively.
No,
he's DH'd most of the year. But what do you think about him? His because he now has 1 year less of control compared to last year, he has now gotten a bit cheaper. And like I said, the defense is not really helping him out very much. Like you said with Vlad, kind of more of a bat at this point. Do you think they ultimately end up moving him?
Yeah, I do. So here's why. Last year it was kind of a fluke. He kind of started off hot. And then pitchers figured him out. They figured out where his cold spot was. And he was like, oh, man, I can't hit that. And he went public and said, look, I know what they're doing to me. And then he adjusted back. And to his credit, he has figured it out. And so now he's overcome that sort of sophomore slumpish thing where he's kind of figured out what he's good at hitting and he's not chasing anymore. And so now he's sort of settled into a productive DH role. Yep. And that's great. Now, I don't think he's going to fit the A's window of contention. So why not trade him now? Because the longer they wait, the more his value will go down because he's really just an older DH. He's 29 already. So, I think he will definitely be moved because now I talked about impact and certainty. He's got both. He's an impact bat and he's certain because he's figured it out. He's settled in. So why not? And the A's, by the way, I have to give them credit. I'm a little bit partial, but they have always been good at kind of these turnaround guys off the waiver wire, off the scrap heap. You see them doing it with Abraham Toro and Miguel Andujar and JJ Bleday and all these guys that they pick up sort of for nothing. And Rooker was another one. He bounced around a few teams, and now look, they make hay with him. So I think they want to cash that in now.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even sometimes I have to remind myself, Brent Rooker is almost 30 years old. So, I almost think he's a lot younger because he hasn't really been a name for a while, but yeah, he's kind of one of those older prospects that came up. So, after we've talked about, guys like Mason Miller, Garrett Crochet, pretty expensive guys, if a team would want to acquire one of those players, one of those pitchers, it's going to be an aggressive move, right? When it comes to this trade deadline season, if you got your eyes on one team really just going all in, pushing all the chips into the middle, if you were to pick one team, which way do you see? Which way would you go there?
For a buyer going all in?
Yeah.
It's the Seattle Mariners for sure.
Ooh,
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. I mean, they're in first place and they need help. And they've told their fan base, hey, we're going for it. And, I know they said the whole 54% thing, but they also have a responsibility to their fan base. And they still have this sort of monkey on their backs where they still haven't been to the World Series. And they've got Castillo, they've got Gilbert, they've got Kirby, they got this great pitching staff. They've done well to a little bit, but and they've got names in their offense, but their offense is struggling. And I heard Jerry DiPoto on the radio last weekend saying, yeah, we are not going to be shy about trading prospects. We are going for it. So, and they've got plenty of prospects and that matters too, because you got to have the capital to do it. Right. So I really think they're going to be the one that's going to go all in. The Dodgers, of course, are going to do it. The Orioles are also going to move a little bit more. Those teams are going to kind of be in bidding wars, I can see, for the best players.
Yeah. Don't say the prospect thing to a lot of Mariners fans out there. There's still lots of Mariners fans and lots of Mariners podcasts out there. Like, no, Cole Emerson, no, we're not moving him. Yeah, could we get a really good picture or bat like that? Yeah, no, but we're hanging on to Cole Emerson. It's like, at some point, it's like, which way are you going to go here, Mariners fans? The 54% thing, the 54% comment thing that DiPoto said in the offseason, or are you going to go for it here, right? You can't just straddle the line, right? You got to make a move at some point. I would love for the Mariners to do it. I do wonder, though, if we're kind of, instead of talking about trades, really, if they got a bat at this point, would it even help? Because it feels like it's almost like a philosophical thing, right? Going on there where they got rid of, one of the hitting guys, one of the hitting coaches there, or like the director of hitting or whatever the position was. So it's like, it's going to be very interesting with the Mariners, and you need Julio Rodriguez to really get it going.
You do.
So they definitely have some internal issues to fix, but I could see that. For me personally, if I were to give you my team, I think I got two. All right. If I'll give you a National League and American League one, I think for me personally, I think the Phillies, I think they got to be aggressive, right? Because you're right here in the middle of this window. Mm-hmm. You've been so close to a World Series. 2 years ago, you're 2 wins away. Last year, you're Game 7 in the NLCS. If there was one team that, really could make a move for someone like a Mason Miller, I could maybe see Dave Dombrowski doing something like that. I've seen it in the past. I've seen him make some wackadoodle moves. Yeah. I can maybe see that. Maybe even Garrett Crochet. You'd have to probably give up someone like an Aiden Miller. Yeah. Probably someone like Mick Abel would have to be in that deal. Maybe Justin Crawford in there. I think the Philly, that's probably my team that I think really they got to make some kind of a move, in my opinion. And I would say the Orioles too, right? This is an Orioles team where there's something about this Orioles team this year. They just feel like they have it. And I would love for them to go make a Crochet move. That just makes so much sense. I think you could argue Mason Miller if they really wanted to go that route. Any other teams you think that probably needs to really put their foot in the pedal?
Gosh, you got me thinking. I mean, the Guardians, I'm going to throw them out there because
I like that.
They find themselves in first place kind of, I'm going to say unexpectedly. Like they typically just sort of hang in there in second-ish, and maybe they go farther, maybe they don't, but they're in first place and they're in a weak division, and they've had uncharacteristically troubles with their pitching staff. So like, when's the last time you saw the Guardians shopping for pitching? It's always been in-house. They have this sort of next man up kind of development thing. So, but they need pitching, and it's weird because they're getting offense, but they're struggling with pitching. Like that's not the script, right? It's typically in Cleveland.
Yeah.
But so I think, now that they've got a little bit of offense, they just need like another arm. And I think they could maybe go farther than anyone expected. So I'm going to throw them out there.
Yeah, I like that. The Guardians, to me, it's, again, you have pieces there. Go make a move, right? Yeah. I get it. But, I don't know. Like I could see the Guardians, maybe, one team we did not bring up, the Angels. They got some pieces that they can move. Maybe you could see like a Taylor Ward, that's been a positive or not a popular destination for him. Maybe that could be a team for Brent Rooker if you wanted to add another bat pitching wise. That's the thing with the Guardians. When you look at the farm system, they do have pieces there, but if you wanted to go for a big piece, like if you somehow could pull off an in-division trade for a Crochet, probably I don't see them having enough to be able to pull something off like that. Could they go for Yusei Kikuchi? I've seen people bring up the idea of a package deal with Bo Bichette and Yusei Kikuchi maybe going there. Bo Bichette, Guardians fans are all over Bo Bichette, despite the low numbers. I've seen lots of Guardians fans really high on Bo Bichette. Like, they would love that. They don't seem to be very high on Brian Rocchio over there. The bat just hasn't really gotten going there. So I love that. I love that with the Guardians. But that actually gets me, it's a perfect transition to this last part before we start to wrap things up here. Everyone knows here on my channel, I've been all over the draft lately. We've had a couple of mock drafts here. I've had people ripping it apart. I've had, a couple of probably guys that should go in the top 10. I've had them falling out of the top 10, and then they say mean things to me in the comments. It is what it is. But with the draft, right, I think the Guardians are really interesting there because they have the number 1 pick. They have a compensation pick after the first round. They have 3 total picks in the top 50. Do you see, because usually when you think of the draft, right, usually it's teams that were not very good in the year prior, obviously, and then they're probably still not very good. But this year, you got the Guardians who are having a great season, and they have the number 1 pick. That doesn't happen very often. Like the Kansas City Royals have the number 6 pick, and hey, they're right there. They got a wild card spot as of right now. Do you see a situation where maybe this draft can actually tie into some trade deadline plans, or maybe tie into how aggressive a team is at the deadline? So like the Guardians, for example, you got someone like Velasquez there, first base prospect, right? You got Kyle Manzardo, who you got last year, a couple of first base prospects. Maybe they could go take someone like a Jack Caglione, number 1 overall, who could end up making it to the major leagues pretty quick. Maybe you could see something like that. Maybe if they wanted to do some kind of maybe offer up Brian Rocchio to another team to get something, young shortstop, maybe they could just go draft JJ Weatherholt with the number 1 pick, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm getting too ahead of myself here, but do you think the draft could end up tying into this deadline for a couple of these teams?
So a couple thoughts here. The traditionalist in me says no, because, there's this sort of typical sort of thing where you draft a guy, the best possible player available, and then 4 years later they show up and have an impact. So there's that gap of time where I have to go through the minors, and that's typically the pattern, right? And so most of the time it doesn't affect your major league plans because it's so far away. So that's still largely the majority of what's going on. So it shouldn't affect your major league strategy so much. You're just stalking. Having said that, there have been some changes. The whole league is getting younger and younger. You see the Angels bringing up young guys that they just drafted. You see Wyatt Langford starting to hit for Texas after he just got drafted.
Michael.
And so I think that's starting to change. And then the other sort of point is what typically happens is teams will be more willing to trade prospects from their current farm at the deadline. I'm thinking about the Padres, for example, because they know they're going to get a couple of draft picks that are going to slot right back in. And so to compensate for that, so we can, take a few guys off the top, slide a few guys up coming up from the draft, and you still got a decent farm. I think that's largely still what happens. And so they're looking at it from a trade capital point of view. Having said that, this is a unique situation, and you're right to point it out, where Cleveland looks like a playoff bound team, and they've got 3 picks in the 50, and they got the 1. So I could see it happening here where they actually might think about their MLB strategy and how this might affect it, given that and also the other sort of thing is there's a lot of college bats at the top of the draft. Like the top 10 guys are almost all college bats, right? And so you figure they're going to have a shorter window to get to the major leagues, like Wyatt Langford did. So I could see that since you bring it up. I think that actually might be a thing this year, but only with those types of teams that are contenders now that happen to be in the top.
Right. Yeah. Very unique. It's a very unique situation. And like you said, the major leagues, it's getting younger and younger, but it's crazy. You help out, with youth baseball in your free time. You can probably see with your own eyes, in person, just so many young kids today, they're just so good at a young age, right?
Right.
Like you're seeing just so many more kids these days. They're so much more advanced like than ever before. Like high school,
Yeah.
kids in high school, you got kids more than ever throwing, low mid 90s in
Yeah.
high school,
Yeah.
which, I remember when I was in high school, if you were throwing like, mid upper 80s, you had, low 90s, scouts were all over you, right? But now it's like, okay, which one of these high school guys are throwing 95,
They're all
right?
doing it. Yeah, it's true.
It's crazy, right?
Well, yeah, and there's something to be said, side topic about arm care, and that's why a lot of injuries happen
yeah,
to major leaguers because they started throwing 90 when they were 14 or 15.
right,
So that's
right,
not good.
right. And
But nonetheless, that is all happening. There's a whole sort of industry of coaches and club teams and travel teams, and they're all sorts of getting all these training tips and so on. So they're developing them younger and younger. And look at the Padres' top draft pick, Ethan Salas. He would be in high school if he wasn't playing for he's still like a kid, right? So it is crazy. Anyway, but yeah, so the sport is getting younger. So I think that's a good point.
Yeah. And, like you said with Wyatt Langford, right? Just for the cycle this past weekend, they were talking about maybe putting him on the World Series roster last year. Like there were conversations about that, which is mind blowing. Could you imagine just yourself, like you're playing college and, a couple months later, like, okay, World Series, like what? You just don't see it. And, I think you could, like you saw Nolan Shanwell last year, right? The Angels are just trying to fast track guys as quickly as they can. So, maybe that could even tie into maybe teams not even in contention, maybe teams, trying to sell off some pieces. Who knows? But like every year, the draft, it's always an exciting time. But I think this one could be pretty unique. So, but John, before we wrap things up, anything else you want to let the audience at home know? Tell us what's going on with baseball trade values. Give us the scoopy scoop. What's going on?
Yeah, we're updating the numbers faster and faster. Every year we get a little better at what we do, hopefully, and get a little faster and more efficient. So the numbers are being updated weekly, and we're going to shift even twice a week now as we get closer and closer to the deadline. So you'll see that benefit. So if you really want to know, what could I get for this guy if I was the GM of your favorite team? That's what that answer to the question is going to happen very frequently. I think the numbers that we have right now, I'm more confident than ever, and they've always been pretty close. I'm more confident than ever that we're going to do really well this year. We're getting a lot of feedback from the industry, from we've got teams and players even signing up as users on our site. We've got agencies, we've got the whole industry sort of doing it. So we're sort of seen as a benchmark for the industry in a way for values. So that's been good to see. We do have a subscription model now, so I would encourage you to go to the site and if you're interested and you want to have some fun with it, sign up for a subscription. It's pretty cheap. So go for it. So thanks for the plug and the help, Robbie.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not even just the trade simulator. All off season, I was using the crap out of the contract extension model and the free agent contract or simulator there. It was fantastic. It was spot on. It was pretty wild to see, like, you'd plug something in there and pretty close, right? The AAVs are all maybe not exactly spot on, but like, wow, if you threw a dart, it was right there. Honestly, it's been cool to see the growth of the site over the last few years. Using it in 2019, I'm thinking, well, what the heck does any of this even mean? I don't know what is going on here, but it's been cool to see over the last few years. So, definitely keep it up there. You guys are doing great, but we'd love to have you back on here, John. We got a busy month ahead. I'm sure we can maybe come back together here in a couple weeks once some more rumors start coming out, and maybe we can unpack some of this stuff here. So
yeah, absolutely. I do think one last point. I think it was Jerry DiPoto who said there's going to be a lot of activity towards the end, I think, and I think he's right. You're going to see a little bit, start to pick up a little bit more here now that we're in July. But I think we're going to have a lot of fireworks towards the end. So just to set that up. Yeah.
Well, I'll be all over it. And I need that in my life, right? I need that, especially trade deadline day. We will be live here all day here on the channel. And I did it last year. You were paying attention, to all of it last year. I sat here for 8 hours last year, and it was adrenaline all day. And as soon as it was done, I couldn't even see anything. I just like collapsed.
Been there, done that, man.
It was insane. But John, thank you so much for coming on yet again. I'm sure we'll get back together here real soon. But everyone, thank you for joining us tonight. Always a pleasure. If you can on the way out, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and we'll talk to you next time.